Wedding season is in full bloom, and if you've been wanting a straighter smile, look no further than Bite. Bite offers clear teeth aligners that help you transform your smile from the comfort of your home or wherever you'll be this time of year. Forget the endless trips to the dentist. Bite's clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered straight to your doorstep. Just take an impression mold of your mouth, preview your 3D smile, and order your all-day or at-night aligners. Bite also knows that wedding season is expensive enough as it is. Their aligners cost thousands less than braces. It's time to let your smile shine. Get started on your smile journey by visiting Byte.com and use code WONDERY at checkout to get your at-home impression kit for only $14.95. That's BYTE.com, code WONDERY to get over 80% off your impression kit.
Hey, before we get started, we've had a really busy week on this podcast. Normally we do one podcast a week. This week we're doing three, or we've done three. This is the third. So in case you missed the last two, which we're calling them bonus episodes, you should go check them out. One that we posted on Sunday is we're calling it an emergency edition of the podcast, where we got together some meditation teachers to talk about election stress. Everybody's freaking out about this election, and meditation may be something that could be useful. So that's one. And then the other on Monday we posted as a bonus was with Robin Roberts, who's the co-anchor of Good Morning America and a daily meditator and just an awesome human being. So those are two bonus episodes. Go check them out. But not before you listen to this one. Here we go. From ABC, this is the 10% Happier Podcast. I'm Dan Harris. Hey, welcome back. My guest this week is one of my favorite human beings. So if you're expecting objectivity, you should download another podcast. Sebene Selassie is, just get ready for somebody who's really smart about meditation practice, about issues of illness, and about issues around surrounding race, and whatever the hell else she wants to talk about. Sebene, thank you very much for coming in.
Oh,
really
thank you,
appreciate
Dan.
it.
Very kind words. Thank you.
There's a lot more to say about you, which we will get to. But I want to ask you the question I always ask everybody, which is how did you come to meditation?
Well, I first came to meditation in high school, not Buddhist meditation. My brother, I think I was about 15, he became what's colloquially known as a Hare Krishna.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay,
wow.
so, but you guys were Ethiopian immigrants, so that must have been that's a real combination of cultures there.
Yeah, it was a mess.
A mess. Your parents freaked out.
So yeah, we'd already been here. So we got here when I was about 3, and so I was 15 at the time. So my parents had been here for a while, but nothing had prepared them for that. So yeah, so he became a Hare Krishna.
How did that happen?
I don't know actually how he came into contact with them. Probably jumping around in their robes and bells
on the
downtown
street
somewhere. Yeah.
This was D.C. That's where you grew up, right?
So we grew up in Washington, D.C., and there was kind of a big scene around the Krishnas then. So this was the 80s, the mid-80s, and the hardcore punk rock scene in D.C., there was this kind of variation of it that was called straight edge.
Yeah, I remember that.
Right. So they
Sure.
were vegan, and they didn't drink, didn't do drugs, and a bunch of them were into Hare Krishna.
I didn't know that. Wow. So was your brother into the whole straight edge thing?
Kind of, sort of on the edge. He was a little bit older. He's 8 years older than me. So he wasn't so much in that scene, but kind of got connected to it. So he had a bunch of friends who were skinheads and, musicians. And they had a temple out in Potomac, Maryland, where a lot of people lived. And also the Indian community would come to, those who, were in the Krishna lineage, but they had this thing called the O Street Temple, which is in O Street in DuPont Circle, and that was sort of the hangout for all the cool kids. So I was not a cool kid at all. Like, I was not a part of that scene, but I would go with him. And so I started meditating by chanting Hare Krishna with mala beads, and quickly kind of realized that wasn't for me, although I was still sort of would hang out with my brother. He moved to New York at some point. I went to actually stay in the temple with him there in Brooklyn, and so I knew a lot about it, but I started doing my own research at that point and started looking into other Eastern philosophy and spirituality. And I went to kind of a hippie high school, alternative private school, and we had peace studies and East Asian studies, and I did a research paper on meditation and taught my class to meditate. I'm sure it was like the worst meditation instruction ever because I had no idea what I was doing, but I was kind of interested, but not really practicing.
But you were, if I recall from just our personal conversations over the years, you were kind of a little bit of a rabble rouser as a little kid. Didn't you tell me some story about like leading protests in your neighborhood or something like that?
Yeah. So my dad was a leader in the Eritrean liberation movement. So when I was young, probably about 4, so 1974, when the revolution happened in Ethiopia, he went back actually and disappeared for
and
a few
fought?
Years. Yes, so he was
Actually, like picked up a gun and fought.
Yeah, he wasn't good at it, but yes, he was a guerrilla fighter, as were many of my cousins, which is not uncommon for Eritrean families. So I'm half Ethiopian, half Eritrean. So yeah, a lot of my cousins on that side were fighters, and my dad disappeared on us for a few years.
Wow.
Yeah.
No warning or?
No. He went back when the revolution happened because nobody knew at that point. You know, at that point, when there was word over here that Haile Selassie had been deposed, there was a lot of excitement because people thought something good was going to happen, and they didn't realize, you know, a nightmare of decades was about to happen. So he went there and then quickly had to flee Addis Ababa. You know, he had been part of the government for many years. He was the Attorney General of Ethiopia and Secretary of the Interior under Haile Selassie. So he was wanted once he got there. So he fled and went back to Asmara, back to Eritrea, where he was from, and then went into the field, as it's called, and became a guerrilla fighter.
How long?
How long was he there?
Yeah.
I really should ask that. I think it was about 2.5, 3 years.
Okay, so not a vacation.
No, yeah, not a vacation for my mom and us because she was now a single mom with 3 kids, one with a major disability, my sister. So it was really, really rough on us. But when he came back, he was still involved with the movement, and
your mom took him back.
She did. That's a whole other story. But yeah, it wasn't a great peacemaking. They're divorced now.
Okay.
Many years later. So I was sort of politicized young through him, and he would take us to rallies and meetings, and I would learn all the EPLF chants, the Eritrean People's Liberation Front. I would come back. We lived in a white neighborhood, middle-class neighborhood, and I would sort of rally all the little white kids around and make them chant, long live EPLF, and raise their fists in the air. And yeah, it was a little ridiculous.
That's kind of adorable.
Yeah.
So I took you on a pretty big detour there, but so here's your brother. He's into the Hare Krishna movement, and you think there might be something to the meditation thing, but not the way they're doing it. So where did your research take you?
Well, it took me into academics. So I went away to college to McGill University, and I majored in comparative religious studies, and I focused on Hinduism and Buddhism, but I really didn't practice. Which is not uncommon for academic religious studies people. So
I'm getting that sense that I've met a bunch of people or read about a significant number of people who I was just actually reading about Jack Kerouac last night. Not an academic, but he was really interested in reading about Buddhism, but didn't practice.
Yeah, and there was even sort of a poo-pooing among scholars of, you don't mix practice and scholarly work. So
like don't get high on your own supply?
Maybe, yeah. That you can't have objectivity, right, if you're actually practicing, which was not the case.
Right. Would exercise physiologists say that, though?
It's ridiculous, yeah.
Okay.
And what's crazy is there's still some scholars and still some departments that lean heavily that way. McGill was not like that. Actually, my advisor was a practitioner, but for whatever reason, I think because I was stuck in my head, because I was busy partying and doing drugs, and because I was actually also very politically involved in college, I wasn't practicing. I was just studying this stuff. And I really didn't come to practice until after I graduated. So I started meditating really when I moved to San Francisco after college.
And you were doing social justice work?
I was doing social service, social justice work, so I got involved in that in college on a volunteer level, and then when I moved to San Francisco, I started working for an after-school program for kids in a pretty messed up neighborhood, the Tenderloin.
Yeah, the Tenderloin, although that's getting a little bit gentrified now, right?
Yeah, everything.
Yeah, San Francisco. So when you started to meditate, what were you doing?
I started going to the Zen Center of San Francisco, which did not work for me. Sort of the strictness and really the anonymity. I felt there wasn't a lot of warmth, and it might be because I wasn't finding the right kind of entry points. So I was really just kind of dabbling on my own, reading a lot, trying to practice at home. And then I moved to New York when I was 25 and started going to all the different centers that were around then. So I think doing what a lot of people do, just sort of kind of hopping and shopping meditation practices. So I did the first 2 levels of training at Shambhala, and I went to a couple of different Zen centers. Then in probably around 2006, 2007, I did my first 10-day retreat, a Gwenka retreat, which was really powerful. It was kind of mind-blowing for me in terms of what I saw and what I experienced. But I didn't really gel with the Gwenka groups and communities back in New York. So I kept doing kind of looking around, and I was really interested in Charlotte Joko Beck at that point. She had a couple of books out. She was a student of Maizumi Roshi and a Dharma heir, so he sanctioned her to teach.
So she was a Zen teacher.
She's a Zen teacher based in San Diego and founded a school of Zen called Ordinary Mind.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah, so Barry Magid, who lives in New York City, is a psychoanalyst. He had a little community here, so I wandered into that, and I liked it, and so it stuck. So he was my first teacher, really, and I was a really bad student.
What do you mean by that? Everybody thinks they're a bad student.
Well, I was in my mid-20s. I was partying a lot still and really just kind of chasing boys, and I would go to sittings back then. The sittings were in his office, his therapy office. So, it was very informal in a lot of ways. It was Saturday mornings, and he would lock...
Not the best time, Saturday morning, for a mid-20s
Yeah, exactly.
person.
So 10 o'clock in the morning, and he would lock the door exactly at 10. And, more than a few times, I was kind of hungover, wandering down the hallway, and I would hear the door click, and I'd have to turn around and kind of do a Buddhist walk of shame back home.
You sent me a very sort of funny but poignant in some ways list of bullet points about your life, some of which I already knew. So you said you were a really bad Dharma student, and then there was something that happened that made you a really good Dharma student. Can you talk about what that was?
Yeah, so I practiced with Barry for a few years, and then I ended up moving to West Africa. My boyfriend at the time worked for the UN, and so I got a job working in the refugee camps in Guinea. And while I was there, I discovered a lump in my left breast. And
you're how old?
At that point, I was 30. How old was I? 33 or 34, yeah.
Were you terrified?
I was, and I got it checked out in Guinea, and they said it was fine. And that, it was just a cyst or, an abnormal growth, but it was benign. I wanted to get a second opinion, so my boyfriend at the time was Danish, so we were in Denmark and got it checked again. They told me the same thing. Moved back to the States. By this point, we had broken up, and things just didn't seem right. The mass was starting to grow, and the breast was starting to change. So I went and got it checked out again, and it was stage 3 breast cancer.
Stage 3.
Yeah. So 34 years old, and single, and living in D.C., which I had returned to because we had split up, but it really wasn't my home anymore. I hadn't lived there since I was in high school, and really disoriented. And there was no Ordinary Mind school in D.C., and I had already started looking for a Sangha when I first got there. And
let's just define Sangha for those who don't know.
Oh, right. So
it's like a Buddhist community. Yeah.
So I started sitting with the Insight Meditation Community of Washington.
Is that Tara Brach?
That's Tara Brach. Yeah. So when I got the diagnosis, I was already part of that community. And and my life turned upside down, but my practice really deepened.
Yeah. I mean, this is where the rubber hits the road.
Really, yeah.
So, okay, I have a million questions, but what was the course of treatment? A, and B, you can take this in whatever order you want, and B, how exactly did it deepen your practice?
Well, initially I didn't do any Western allopathic medicine. So for the first while, I was doing sort of alternative therapies.
No chemo, radiation, lumpectomy?
I didn't do chemo, radiation. I was getting a lot of conflicting opinions. Some surgeons were saying because of the way the tumor had kind of pulled the breast, they couldn't really do a clean mastectomy. So they wanted to, some said they wanted to treat me with radiation first. Some said they wanted to treat me with chemo first, see if they could shrink it. So I started doing natural therapies, which were very intensive. I actually went part-time at work, and they were really supportive about that. I was working in international development at the time, and focused all my energies on that and practicing a lot. So it deepened my practice in the sense that I was meditating a lot, trying to do retreats, taking care of myself. And then pretty soon after that, I moved to New York and then started pursuing treatment. And I found this very zany, wacky oncologist who's amazing and probably saved my life, who did a form of treatment that's really uncommon for breast cancer. It's really uncommon for most cancers, called chemoperfusion, where they actually flood the area with chemo. And he was able to shrink the tumor doing that. And then I did a regular course of chemo, very, very long, and then radiation.
And I can only imagine trying to meditate while you're suffused with nausea and feeling weak. And did you do a lot of it lying down?
I did do a fair amount of practice lying down. Yes, and the chemoperfusion is very caustic treatment. So I actually had pain in the tissue itself, wow. Which extended to the back because I had cancer in the lymph node under my left arm as well. So the perfusion really affected that whole left upper area. So yeah, there was a lot of pain. There was a lot of fear and kind of just trauma. And yeah, I've had to practice with all of it.
Yeah, I was projecting there, what I would be feeling in that situation. And so fear and anger would be the two biggies.
Yeah, the anger, I'll tell you, a really good kind of prequel for cancer is working in refugee camps. It was kind of hard to take my pain too personally and too seriously. That helped me put things in perspective. I had never really, although I come from Africa, I'd traveled in Africa and seen a lot of different experiences having traveled around the world a fair bit. Nothing had prepared me for kind of just the insanity of a refugee camp. Mm-hmm. And this was in 2002, 2003, so we were on the border of Liberia and Cote d'Ivoire, so both were blowing up at that time. And, within days, tens of thousands of people would be on the border, traumatized, homeless, weary. I was working specifically in a program for unaccompanied minors or separated children, which is just, a
gut-wrenching,
heartbreaking
yes.
reality. So the anger part wasn't as strong for me because I of course I would have these sentiments, especially when I would see somebody like smoking cigarettes and eating cheeseburgers and, perfectly healthy as far as I knew. I didn't know anything about them, but even some of the people in my life and didn't have cancer, and me who meditates and does yoga and eats well, just faced with this harsh reality. But that kind of why me, I think I quickly replaced that with why not me,
So that, that's, I can imagine a huge service that was done for you by you in some ways, in the fact that by dint of the fact that you had chosen to live a life of service in this way. But I'm curious about the meditation. So you kind of tripled down on that. Was it useful? Because, I would imagine a lot of people listening to this practice meditation for, to be more focused, to have a little bit more calm in their life, to not be so yanked around by their emotions, et cetera, et cetera. But this is an entirely different kettle of fish. So did it work in that crucible?
Yes. It was useful, in that it gave me tools to recognize what was coming up when I had fear or panic or, when I was spinning out in what if. And really, I got really sick later on. And there was a lot of fear about whether I was going to make it or not. And so that.
What do you mean by really sick? Because it sounds to me like stage 3 breast cancer is really sick.
Well, I had a really strange turn of events where, things happened that weren't related necessarily to the cancer. So, for example, I had this bout of nausea at one point, not because of chemo. I hadn't actually started chemo yet, because of some other treatments they had given me, and I was throwing up, and it led to a twist in my intestine. So I had a twisted intestine and was hospitalized with kidney failure because they hadn't figured out what was going on, because they thought it was just the cancer, but it was all these other things. So, a long story. And in summary, I was really, really ill, and they were really scared to operate on me because they didn't know if I could survive the operation. And luckily, my intestine untwisted naturally. But I was lying in bed in pain, really scared. And at those times, I could be with the experience, and also not just meditation, but really the Dharma practice of the Dharma being the teachings of the Buddha, the Dharma practice kind of allowing me to put things in perspective.
What do you mean by that? How do you, specifically, what do you mean? What is the difference between the meditation and the Dharma practice that you're referring to?
Well, I think the meditation helped me, sort of not project the pain into the future. So if I was having pain, to actually be with the sensation of it and not do what we normally do, which is actually feel something that's not happening. We sort of panic, and then we think we can't handle the pain. Mm-hmm. Stress is really a stressor that we think we can't handle. So to really be with the sensations, and sometimes need medication, but when I could press the button and a nurse would come and give me more medication, I could also appreciate the fact that I had medication. I distinctly remember being in the hospital bed, and this was the time when Darfur was blowing up, and I had seen an image in the New York Times of this mother who was already emaciated herself, holding her dying child, and just imagining the pain that they'd been in, and realizing I had this little pain button that would bring this very kind being with drugs to help me alleviate it. So it was partly actually being with the true sensations, not projecting to something that wasn't happening, but also just the appreciation and gratitude for what I had in that moment.
And the latter was the result, you think, from learning about the teachings of the Buddha generally, as opposed to doing the specific meditation practices?
Yeah, because I think that the teachings, the sort of larger teachings, do teach us a lot about gratitude and perspective, and the 5 daily recollections, which is chanted in most Buddhist countries and almost daily by a lot of people.
What are they? Because I won't remember.
They're that I will age. I have not gone beyond aging. I will grow ill. I have not gone beyond illness. I will die. I have not gone beyond death. Everything that I have that is dear to me, I will lose. And I am subject to karma.
It's a little dark.
It's dark only if you only want the positive side of the equation.
Right, puppies and Skittles.
Yeah,
if you only want sunshine, you're going to be in for some serious disappointment.
Yeah, every night when the sun sets,
Yeah.
And just being able to hold all that, and that's not to say we don't want to alleviate the suffering that's out there and help people who can be helped, but to just put our own lives in perspective and realize that it's not always going to be up. Sometimes it's going to be down.
Indeed. So just to back up for a second, because people like to hear this, I think, what kind of when you sat on the cushion, what was your meditation? And I guess you were still practicing in the original mind. Well, actually, by now you'd moved into the insight meditation world. What kind of meditation were you doing when your butt hit the cushion?
Yeah. At that point, I was doing a lot of metta or loving kindness practice. A teacher had recommended that I make that a big part of my practice. So for months and months, I was only sending loving kindness and wishes of well-being to myself.
Just yourself?
Just to myself. And I would start my practice and really, spend maybe half the time doing that, which is also a concentration practice.
Yeah, so the mind gets pretty sharp.
Right. And then I would be with, starting with the breath, be with the sensations of the body.
Starting with the breath. Okay, so you're feeling whatever comes up in your body, and then when you get lost, start again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And, within that, of course, noticing what's happening in the mind. I wasn't doing a lot of sort of mindfulness of mind or emotions right then because my thoughts and emotions were all over the place.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Really sticking with the body as being in the present moment. At that point, when I was really going through rough treatment, I was future tripping a lot.
Just there's a great word in Buddhism, which is prapancha, which is the imperialistic tendency of mind, where you take a data point in the current moment and just project out into the future. So I'm having this pain from this treatment. This is going to get worse and worse and worse. I can't handle this. I'm going to die.
Right. Yeah, that was like every 10 minutes for me, maybe.
Yeah, I'm surprised it wasn't every 30 seconds.
Yeah.
A huge part of the Dharma or the Buddhist teachings is about getting you to not have such an attachment to your body, because this is a temporary vessel and definitely fragile and, rotting. So was that useful?
Yes and no. I think that I have the propensity to be stuck in my head. I'm kind of intellectually oriented, and we're surrounded by, especially my dad, but people around me were that way. And so I actually needed to kind of connect with the body more. In a way, yes, it's helpful to kind of know the impermanence of the body and know that this is, like you said, a temporary vessel. But in the actual experience of the body, I actually needed to connect with the body more.
Right.
Yeah.
But would it be useful not to take it so personally? I mean, because the point is, this body isn't yours, And so if you're experiencing things in your body that you don't like, if you don't identify it as you, it doesn't feel so insulting in some ways.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think when you connect to the body in a deeper way, it doesn't feel so personal. And that's the benefit of a longer retreat and deeper practice, but you really start to feel all the energetic realities of this body that, you can't really put into words anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can even understand it on some intellectual levels, like how connected do you think most of us feel to our pancreas or the microbiome, which is something my wife studies, which is, trillions, I'm going to get this wrong, but trillions of little life forms in our gut that are not you, but without those life forms, you would have trouble surviving. Like they perform a lot of useful things, services for your body. But so it's like, or if you were to when you clip your fingernails, or what is that part of you that's gone? Or if you were to lose a leg, how far would you have to cut in order until you're not you anymore? So you can kind of understand this intellectually, but that is like kind of intellectual Chinese food in a way, because you forget it very quickly.
Right.
Your situation entirely different. Entirely different. So you ended up pulling out of this.
I did. So the treatments worked, and I was deemed cancer-free.
How many years later?
I think that the course of treatment took me about 2 years. So with my kind of alternative treatment, it was about 2.5 years, that leg of it. And then about 5 years later, I was re-diagnosed with cancer again, stage 4. So I had come back in the right breast this time, and in the bone, my chest bone.
So at this point, you're in your late 30s.
I'm in my late 30s and metastatic cancer, yeah.
And in between, if I got the timeline right, in the interregnum there, you met Freddie.
I did. I met my husband. And I really, because I've been deepening my practice so much, I had started to study to become a teacher.
So this was before I met you, because you were the executive director at the New York Insight Meditation Center. So this is when the second round of cancer hit. This was before that job?
Yeah, I was working at New York Insight, but I wasn't yet the executive director.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the second round comes and metastatic. So I think we all know what that means, that it's spread, but how far had it spread?
It spread into the bone and lymph nodes and the breast. So it hadn't left kind of my upper body, but once you're metastatic, they consider you to have cancer for life.
So how did you take that news?
Not well. Yeah.
Does anybody take it well?
Yeah, I don't know. In some ways it was more devastating because it felt like, this second knock to the head. That again, it's like I need this, like I need a hole in the head after what I'd been through. But luckily, they didn't want to do chemo. They only did very high dose, but only radiation, which is exhausting and not easy in itself. But it's much easier than doing both, obviously. And in a lot of ways, because I had been practicing so much and really deeply, I really felt like I could handle it. Whatever was going to happen, that I was going to be able to meet it.
So in the space between the first round of cancer and was it 5 years later?
Yeah.
You had been doing a significant amount of practice, and so your mind state was, do you think, significantly different as you met the second wave?
Yeah, definitely, and also because of the first experience. There's some truth to that quote from Nietzsche that everybody misuses, something like, whatever doesn't kill me makes me stronger. It's true, just that the wisdom and kind of spiritual maturity that came out of getting through that experience in a spiritually mature way was really empowering. But
on this one, was it seems to me, again, I'm projecting, I can't help it, a little scarier in that it seems like they're saying there's no back door. On the first one, it was bad, but they declared you cancer-free. This time they're coming to you and saying it's terminal.
Yes.
Or chronic. I don't know what the right word is.
Yeah, I don't know what the right word is either. And I like to sort of throw skepticism in around statistics. And just, I think at some point I made a decision that I was going to be on, sort of the positive side of that statistic.
What was the statistic?
Just whatever statistics exist about the rate of survival from metastatic breast cancer.
And they weren't good.
They weren't good, but, I just sort of asked myself, well, why can't I be in kind of, I meditate, I take care of myself, I eat well. Like, why wouldn't I be in the 10% or whatever it is of the positive side of that statistic?
And as it turns out, you were.
I was, until I got diagnosed again.
Right, which was about a year ago.
A year ago, yeah.
Yeah, I remember getting the email.
Yeah.
What was the diagnosis the third time?
So the third time, it had returned to the left breast. It was in the left lymph nodes. It was in the lungs. It was in the lung lymph nodes, and it was in bones. So it really, really spread.
Hey.
And that, I mean, in some ways, of course, I was devastated and in tears receiving the diagnosis, but I also kind of had to laugh. I mean, it was just ridiculous. It's like, oh, maybe every 5 years I get cancer now.
Mm-hmm.
I had a great team, and again, they didn't want to do chemo. This time, they didn't want to do radiation either. So they put me on hormone therapy, and I doubled down on the natural treatments as well. Really took care of myself, basically took the fall and winter off. And through...
Last fall and last winter. So
yeah.
As we record this, it's September.
Right, a year later. And had some wonderful friends raise funds for me so that we could kind of do that. Freddie took time off to take care of me as well. And amazingly, last December, I got a PET scan back that I still had cancer in my body, but unbelievable, the changes in terms of not only the size of the spots and tumors, but also the intensity.
What do your doctors think is going on there? And what do you think is going on there?
It depends who you talk to. If you talk to my oncologist, it's just the hormone treatment working. If you talk to my naturopath, it's everything. It's my diet. It's, not having too much stress for the past year, really taking it a lot easier on myself, but also in what I'm doing. And I think if you talk to my Dharma teachers and from my perspective, there's also something inexplicable that happens to all of us,
Welcome to the Bishop Gray Academy, the country's most exclusive boarding school, a place where the best and brightest aren't fighting to be prom queen or captain of the football team. They're on track to become the next Supreme Court justice. Academy is a new scripted podcast that follows Ava Richards, a brilliant scholarship student who must quickly adapt in a school where rules mean nothing and money means everything. Ava sets her sights on being the first scholarship student to make the list, Bishop Gray's all-coveted academic top 10, curated by the headmaster himself. But with no clear path to the top, she joins the Night of the Wolf, Bishop Gray's underground society with more secrets than the Illuminati. If she bends to their demands in exchange for her own success, one of the 10 coveted spots will be hers, but at what cost? Enjoy Academy on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. Binge all 10 episodes of Academy early and ad-free on Wondery Plus. Join Wondery Plus over on the Wondery app or on Apple Podcasts.
Academy is a new scripted podcast that follows Ava Richards, a brilliant scholarship student attending Bishop Gray Academy, the country's most exclusive boarding school. Academy takes you into the world of a cutthroat private school where power, money, and sex collide in a game of life and death. Binge all 10 episodes of Academy early and ad-free on Wondery Plus.
So what is the prognosis now?
Well, I have a PET scan on Thursday, so I'll know more next week. But everything looks okay right now as far as my tumor markers. So tumor markers are a blood test. They're not the most reliable in terms of exactly what's going on, but they've been going down and down steadily even since December.
Well, you used the phrase, everything looks okay. Like, you look more than okay. You look phenomenal. So nobody would guess that you were dealing with illness, never mind something this serious.
Yeah.
So you're clearly doing something right.
I take good care of myself. I try and eat really well. I try and obviously meditate and take my life probably a lot more easy than the average New Yorker.
Yeah.
And the way that I used to function in the city.
Well, what is your practice like now?
So my meditation practice, I do first thing in the morning, and I sit from anywhere, depending on my day, anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes. I do some chanting. I do a sitting practice that usually depends on the day, what's needed. If I'm really feeling scattered, I might do some kind of concentration or gathering practices. Usually the breath is a good one for me. And then what I mostly like to do is open awareness.
Just define that.
So just really being mindful, aware, and with whatever is arising. So noticing changing phenomena, noticing what comes in and out of my perception. And so that could be thoughts, it could be sensations, could be sounds. And I like to do that practice because that's what I carry with me into the day. So the rest of my practice is daily practice of just, really checking in with the body, checking in with my awareness moment to moment as much as possible, which is not all that much, but more than it used to be.
And you have done a lot of retreats too. I know last time, or one of the last conversations we had on the phone, you had just come back from South Africa where you had done a pretty lengthy retreat with your husband.
Yes.
I think you were telling me you kind of wanted to kill him because he was snoring or something like that.
Yeah, I was calling him, he doesn't know this, so now if he listens to this, he'll know, but I was calling him Fidgety McFidget in my head and in the interviews. Yeah, we actually shared a room.
Bad idea. How is that a good idea?
Silence. It was amazing. It was
Really?
a really incredible experience, yeah.
Except for the fidgeting.
Yeah, that was in the hall.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So I did a month long in South Africa. My teachers have a hermitage there. So.
Who are your teachers?
My teachers are Tanisara and Kitisaro. They are they have Pali names, but they're Westerners. So Kitisaro is from Tennessee, and Tanisara is from London, and they were both monastics. So Kitisaro was a monk, and Tanisara was a nun with Ajahn Chah, who was a Thai forest monk.
Widely regarded as a master.
Yeah. So they both studied with him, and after about, I think, 15 years, they fell in love and left the monastery and got married and disrobed.
The widest sense of that word.
Yeah.
Now that you've walked us through this really harrowing health odyssey that you've been on, what do you think are the lessons for the rest of us?
That's a good question. You know, I love this teaching of the Buddha about the 8 worldly winds. Do you know that one?
No, I don't know anything. So.
You know a lot, Dan. 8 worldly winds. Oh, let me forget them now. Okay, let's see if I can remember them.
I have a phone in my pocket. We could
yeah,
Google
we can look it up. Pleasure and pain, gain and loss,
fame and
ill
disrepute.
repute.
Yeah.
A crazy Victorian translation, and praise and blame.
Praise and blame. Yeah. Okay. I knew. I had heard of these. Yes.
So just our tendency to want one side of that equation. And
oh yeah,
and how when the other side shows up, we think it's a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
We think there's something going wrong, and it's that sort of question that we can ask ourselves, like, why not me? In any moment, and this can happen to any of us. It could happen to us. It could happen to our children. It could happen to our loved ones.
Not only that, it will happen.
It will happen. It might, I hope that most people I know don't have to experience cancer or grave illness like that before their very old age. But something will happen. That side of the equation hits us every single day. And it's incredible. I mean, I'm telling myself this as I'm speaking to you, but it's incredible how much every time it shows up, whether it's a blister on our foot or a head cold or somebody, yelling at us and blaming us for something that, we didn't feel we did wrong, we think it's a mistake. We think this should not be happening.
But does that still happen with you? Like, you've gotten this repeated series of jolts of perspective. So do you no longer sweat the small stuff?
A lot less.
So blisters, you can handle blisters.
If you bring Freddie in here, he might have a different story to tell you. He will have a different story to tell you. But, I think I'm able to kind of, definitely with the big stuff, talk myself off the ledge and just realize, this is just part of life. And more with the small stuffs as well. Yeah.
People really don't like talking about this stuff.
No. Yeah, it's not comfortable. It's not pleasant in a lot of ways, and that's a fundamental teaching of meditation, right? Is that second foundation of mindfulness, to just be aware of pleasant, unpleasant, and in some ways, a lot of practice, I think, is learning to tolerate mostly the unpleasant because we like the pleasant, and just kind of growing realistic about life.
Realistic about life. There's a way in which that phrase could be ignored because it sounded improvised, but that is it. I mean, the truth is nobody gets out of here alive.
No. And nobody gets out of here without sorrow and loss, and that's not a bad thing. I love this saying from Charlotte Joko Beck I read once. She said, joy is whatever is happening minus our opinion of it.
Yeah, that used to be your email tag.
Yeah. And she's making the distinction between joy and happiness. So happiness and unhappiness happen, throughout the day. We can have moments of unhappiness or happiness, but joy is something different.
How's it different?
Joy is not about pleasant, unpleasant. Joy is about an experience of freedom regardless what's happening. So, I could be in that sickbed and have gratitude for pain reliever and gratitude for my life and all the loved ones. So I can still have that pain and have that feeling of joy or freedom.
You said before that, nobody gets out without sorrow, etc. But, wasn't the Buddha advertising an escape from sorrow, lamentation, and blah, blah, blah? Wasn't he saying nirvana, enlightenment, liberation, awakening, the island, freedom, the beyond, the hard to see, whatever, all those names, was a way out of this?
Yes, and he's also purportedly wept or was sorrowful when his two greatest students died. So this is semantics here, but it's not that we don't have happiness and unhappiness. It's that we can be with both with a measure of ease.
Our mutual friend Mark Epstein has said that it may be a little bit like being punched in the face when you're on heroin.
I don't know if Mark knows that experience.
No, I think he was theorizing. Just based on my acquaintance with him. Let me ask. There are so many things I would like to talk to you about, but I'm sensitive to your time. But the other area of focus for you, and something that we've talked about quite a bit, is race. I don't know. I don't have any. I have a million. I'm sure I will have specific questions, but let me just throw that out there. What's on your mind these days when I use that word?
Well, I'm a Black woman, which you can't tell if this is only audio necessarily by my accent. My cousin's boyfriend the other day told me I sounded like a California white girl. So,
well, one could theorize based on what we're saying about your Ethiopian / Eritrean extraction, but yes.
Right. Oh, right. Exactly. Yeah. Good point, Dan. For me,
what is a Black woman supposed to sound like?
Well, that's a good question too, and could bring up issues around unconscious bias, which is one of the things I'm really interested in around race right now. So this is a big discussion in Buddhist communities and Western Buddhist communities right now because they tend to be the convert communities, obviously not the Asian immigrant ones, but they tend to be very white and upper middle class generally.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been on enough retreats to see that myself.
Yeah. And there is a desire to kind of be more inclusive. I can't tell you the number of years I was practicing, not only being often the youngest person in the room, but as my friend La says, I was the only person of color besides the Buddha in the room. And I really didn't even realize, I was so used to being in white spaces all the time, I didn't even realize the level of discomfort that I had that was sort of underlying. There is, has been documented that people of color in white spaces operate with sort of this threat response, that there's this often validated feeling that they will be experienced in a certain way, so they often underperform or behave in particular ways that limit them. So if we're talking about freedom and ease, that's not happening in these white spaces. And from the side of the white communities, so we're talking about, again, Buddhist communities here, but we could sort of expand that to the larger society, there's unconscious bias happening. And to me, these sort of subtle aspects of the unconscious mind they're just excellent topics for Buddhists to explore because that's what we do. We study the mind. But there's a resistance to really talking about it.
A resistance from who?
A resistance from a lot of white meditators who are uncomfortable talking about issues of identity, talking about issues of race and whiteness, and particularly of racism and unconscious bias, white privilege. Because, we all, it's not cool to be a racist anymore, I mean, in most places.
No.
But there's a sort of a new order of racism that is this implicit bias and unconscious bias that doesn't really get talked about because nobody wants to be called a racist. Nobody wants to really look at the ways in which they might stereotype people or make assumptions, have fears, have judgments about people based on the color of their skin.
It's hard. It's hard because there's almost the taboo against racism is just so justifiably severe.
Mm-hmm.
There's a line from Stephen Batchelor, I'm going to mangle it, but the great Buddhist writer Stephen Batchelor, who says something to the effect of, if you look into your own mind, you're going to see a rapist and a killer sometimes. Mm-hmm. You're going to see a racist too. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants to see it, but you're going to, if you're willing to look, you'll see it. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean it'll arise and pass just like everything else, but you have to be willing to acknowledge it's there. I'm surprised, therefore, that there's so much resistance among these Buddhists, given that that's what we're in the business of looking.
Yeah, well, I think that there's a real, especially among Buddhists, these ideals of kindness and compassion. There can be a bypassing of anything that's sort of negative.
That's a great term, spiritual bypass. You were the first person I ever heard this term from.
Oh, okay.
That you, so it's like we believe the practice is enough. So we don't have to work on our crap. We don't have to really examine our behavior or attitudes or subconscious conclusions about people of other races and ethnicities because we're sending love and kindness.
Yeah. Yeah, so spiritual bypassing was coined by John Wellwood in the 80s to describe kind of this tendency, especially among Western practitioners, to not deal with negative emotions, to bypass sort of anger and depression and rage and emotions that they didn't want to feel and just kind of prematurely transcend them.
But that just seems to me to be like a complete contradiction with the thrust of the Dharma, which is to look at everything.
It is, and I think it is particularly this Western phenomena because we can, the Dharma is vast. There's so many teachings and we can pick and choose. So that transcendent stuff looks pretty good. Like I want to get there. And so you can ignore looking at everything if you just want to get to that peace and stillness. And that was happening a lot. And that was remedied somewhat or addressed through all the psychological work and this marriage of Western psychology and Buddhist psychology, and Mark has done a lot of work around that as well. One of the leaders in sort of seeing, where we might need a different approach to actually look at our stuff and not bypass it.
Jack Kornfield as well.
Yeah. So, but this tendency for what actually a friend of Brian Lesage, who's a teacher.
I'm taking his course right now. Brian is running a course through, which I highly recommend if anybody's interested. The Barre, Barre, that's the name of a town in Massachusetts, Barre Center for Buddhist Studies. And Brian is running a course, which is, it's an online course. They're offering it right now. It's too late to sign up for it, but they'll probably offer it again, called Identity, Not Self, and Awakening. It's a mouthful. But it's all about looking at this stuff through the lens of Buddhism.
Right. Yeah, and Brian and I sort of kind of hybrided this term cultural spiritual bypassing. We're going to teach a course at BCBS on that to look at, so we psychologically bypass maybe anger and we don't want to deal with it, so we just let go, but we actually have just repressed it. And I met plenty of passive-aggressive Buddhists over the years to recognize that that's something that people can do. They can sort of say, I just want to be peaceful. I'm not going to look at that. But we can do the same thing around cultural issues. We can sort of have all of these tendencies that we just don't want to look at. We want to go straight to loving kindness and oneness and interdependence and the Buddha nature and not realize that, we sort of get tense when we're walking down the street and a young black man with a hoodie is walking past us.
Yep.
And not to be able to acknowledge that is not looking at that stuff.
So what can we do about it? And I don't want to hold myself up in any way as some sort of example or exemplar here. I'm willing to talk. I'm not afraid to look at it or talk about it, but I'm sure there are lots of ways that unconscious bias is working in my life because it is unconscious. Mm-hmm. So what can we do to root it out? What can we do to root it out and be better?
Well, I think that one is to talk about it. And, it's not only around race, it's around all sorts of issues. There are these wonderful...
Sexism.
Gender,
Yeah.
sexuality, size.
Mm-hmm.
I've been educating myself recently about fat phobia, which I really didn't recognize in myself for a long time. I'm ashamed to say that it's only through actually a number of students who have been pointing things out to me and posting articles on Facebook that I'm realizing kind of the size judgments, the size bias that I create, and so part of it is just educating ourselves, being aware, having conversations, and then I think a lot of it in real time is learning to catch it. And that's where meditation practice and this conversation about the mind that, Buddhists are very adept at is really helpful because it is in a moment that we can see it. But if we are not looking for it and we don't want to see it, then it's not going to happen. So, in that moment where you see this kid and you realize this stereotype is coming up, can you do a replacement of that? Sometimes I'll ask myself, even in my neighborhood or in my building, if I have that tendency to come up, I'll just say, well, maybe he's a Rhodes Scholar. I don't know. We make all sorts of assumptions about people based on what they're wearing, how they look that day, that we wouldn't necessarily make about someone else.
And Brian points this out in this course. It's not that you have to beat yourself up every time it happens. It's just to see that it's happening.
Right.
Then that actually makes it much more doable. Mm-hmm. Because if we're going to be so ashamed that it's happening, you're either not going to look or you're going to be in for a lot of suffering.
Right.
But if you are given permission for it to happen and just the mission is just to see it and maybe not be so captivated by it, that's doable.
And to realize we're all affected by it. If we're talking about race, then white people, a lot of it is around guilt, and to realize that everyone is affected by it. That some of the officers that were involved in Freddie Gray's death were black. That we're all internalizing these external systems, and but are we willing to be honest and look at that?
What do you think can and should be done to bring this practice that we're talking about, Buddhism, secular meditation, whatever you want to call it, it's got lots of flavors, to make it more attractive to all sorts of people rather than, I haven't seen the data, but my unscientific polling seems to suggest that it's an overwhelmingly upper middle class white phenomenon at this point. What can be done about this?
I think that there are a lot of different things. I'm not an expert on how to bring this to the masses, but from what I see, there's sort of that secularization that's happening that's bringing it into schools, like with Mindful Schools and Holistic Life Foundation and other programs.
Yeah, we had Ollie Smith on the show.
Yeah, and all those programs are doing great work. When we're talking about meditation itself, we're talking about the Buddhist teachings and the Dharma. What I see works really well is this phenomena of affinity groups. And to me, the Buddha is supposed to have said to some of his monks, teach in the vernacular. There's this question, do we teach in the classical language and keep it pure? Some monks are teaching in the vernacular. That seems wrong. And he said, no, teach in the vernacular because people aren't going to understand the teachings if you're not speaking to them in a way that's understandable. And so this idea that everyone is going to understand the way Jack Kornfield teaches the Dharma or Joseph Goldstein or me, that they might need it spoken to them in a different way. There's a lot of groups that meet around 12 steps. So Buddhist meditation groups that are oriented around AA, NA, the other 12-step programs. And they speak differently in that group. They teach the teachings in a different way that's relevant for that community. So people of color groups, the Dharma is going to be communicated in a different way that's relevant to those communities. And to not see that as isolationist or, a threat, it's also, I've heard it be challenged as not in line with the teachings because we're all one. And it's like, yeah, we're all one, and you talk funny. I want to hear it taught in a different way.
No, I think it's important. We all gravitate to teachers who we can relate to.
Right.
And so it just makes sense. And you have a lot more options if you're white, because there's a huge overwhelming majority of white people in the teacher class.
Yeah.
There's no two ways about it.
And that's an emphasis right now also to make sure that we have more teachers, teachers of color and people from other groups.
So I'm very close with Joseph Goldstein, for example, who founded the Insight Meditation Society along with other people. But I know I don't want to come off as an apologist because you can tell me if I'm wrong about this, but it seems to be a very high priority for him. And I get the sense from those at those in positions of power and responsibility within the Buddhist world that it is on their mind, and they seem to be trying to do something about it. Am I giving them too much credit, or do you think I'm right about that, or I'm wrong about that?
I think there's more awareness about that now, especially in particular communities. I think, yes, in the Insight community, that conversation is very strong, and it's challenging. It's this stuff is deeply rooted, and it's rooted in the systems. It's rooted in the institutions and in the structures, and it's going to bring up all sorts of questions around how we do everything. So this, for example, and I'm sure Brian will talk about this in the course, we talked about it in our segment, just the overemphasis on silence. There's so much emphasis on silent practice here, and it's very profound, it's very powerful. There is not the same kind of emphasis in Asia. If you ever traveled in particularly in Southeast Asia, where this tradition, the Insight tradition, comes from, there's a lot of yakking going on in temples and monasteries. And of course, there is a lot of meditation practice, but kind of the preciousness of silence here it might not appeal to people of color, to younger people. Huh. And so to start to understand that it might challenge these things that we've decided is the Dharma, is the teachings, but actually are culturally constructed as well.
That's really interesting. Where can people find out more about you or even contact you if they want?
My website is my name, sebeneselassie.com.
Can you spell it?
SEBENESELASSIE.
And you've slowed down. I talked over you. There was a .com there. It's not a .net. You've slowed down a little bit, but are you still teaching? I know you were doing coaching. Are you still doing all of that?
Yeah, I am. I'm starting to teach more again. I'm not going to be doing a whole lot of retreat teaching just because I find the travel challenging. But Brian and I are teaching a retreat in May at BCBS, and I'll do some teaching here and there. But yeah, I teach locally and I coach.
Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that I didn't give you a chance to? Anything I should have asked you that I didn't?
We covered so much. I feel like I've had a therapy session. It's great.
And I don't even charge. Okay, before we let you go, an update. In that interview, which we recorded a few weeks ago, you heard Seb mention that she was on her way to go get some new tests. So since then, she's gotten the results back, and they were really positive, and she's doing great. So a huge relief for Seb and for everyone who loves her. So a happy ending to this podcast, and we'll be back next week with more. Hey, Prime members. You can listen to 10% Happier early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Download the Amazon Music app today. Or you can listen early and ad-free with Wondery Plus in Apple Podcasts. Before you go, do us a solid and tell us all about yourself by completing a short survey at wondery.com/survey.